The rejection ceremony should have killed her. Instead, it set her free. Lyra Blackthorn knelt in the center of the ancient stone circle, her wrists bound with silver-threaded rope that burned against her skin. The entire Crescent Moon pack surrounded her, their eyes glowing amber in the flickering torchlight. Not one face showed mercy. Not even her own mother's. Lyra Blackthorn, Alpha Marcus's voice boomed across the clearing, "You stand accused of bringing shame upon our bloodline. For 23 years, you have failed to shift. You are weak. You are broken. You are no longer one of us." The words hit harder than any physical blow. Lyra had known this day would come, but hearing it spoken aloud made her chest tighten with grief she couldn't show. Weakness was not tolerated in the Crescent Moon pack. And she, the wolf who couldn't become a wolf, was the ultimate weakness. "The severance ritual will cut the bonds that tie you to our pack," Marcus continued, raising the ceremonial blade high above his head. The silver gleamed like a star against the night sky. "You will no longer be our burden to bear." Lyra's mother, Elena, stepped forward from the crowd. For one desperate moment, Lyra thought she might intervene. But Elena only lifted her chin higher, her face carved from stone. "I renounce you as my daughter," Elena said, her voice steady. "The Blackthorn line ends with you." The pack began to chant in the old language, their voices rising and falling like a funeral dirge. Lyra felt the mystical chains that had bound her to these people since birth begin to strain and crack. The silver threads that connected every pack member to each other and to their alpha, threads she'd always felt so weakly, now pulled taut as piano wire. Alpha Marcus brought the blade down. The ceremonial cut should have been symbolic, a shallow slice across her palm to represent the severing of bonds. But as the silver touched her skin, something exploded inside her chest. Power. Raw, untamed, and absolutely terrifying. The mystical chains didn't just break, they shattered like glass, sending shockwaves through every wolf present. Lyra gasped as energy flooded her system, racing through her veins like liquid fire. Her vision went white-hot, then cleared to reveal something impossible. She was standing. The silver ropes that had bound her wrists lay in pieces at her feet, and she hadn't even tried to break them. The ceremonial blade in Marcus's hand had snapped in half. And every single member of her former pack had stumbled backward, their faces twisted with shock and something that looked almost like fear. "What?" Marcus's voice came out as a rasp. Lyra looked down at her hands. They were glowing with a faint silver light that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. When she raised her eyes to meet the Alpha's gaze, she saw him flinch. "Your eyes," her mother whispered, pressing a hand to her throat. "They're silver. Not the warm amber of the Crescent Moon pack. Not even the brilliant gold of an Alpha. Silver. Like moonlight on water, like starfire in the darkness." The pack scattered like leaves in a windstorm, some stumbling over each other in their haste to get away from her. Only Marcus remained, though his hand shook as he pointed at her with what remained of the ceremonial blade. "Impossible," he breathed. The bloodline was confirmed dead. The records were destroyed. "They're all gone." "What bloodline?" Lyra's voice came out stronger than she'd expected, carrying across the clearing with an authority she'd never possessed. But Marcus was already backing away, his face pale with terror. "Get out," he snarled. "Get out of our territory and never return. If I see you again, I'll kill you myself." Lyra stood alone in the stone circle, power still humming under her skin like a caged animal. She should have been devastated. Cast out, rejected by everyone she'd ever known. Instead, she felt alive. More alive than she'd ever been. As she walked away from the only home she'd ever known, fragments of whispered conversations followed her on the wind. Words she'd heard before but never understood. The Alpha King's bloodline. The impossible trial. No wolf has survived it in 3 centuries. But if someone could. The forest welcomed her with open arms, and for the first time in her life, Lyra Blackthorn wasn't afraid of what she might become. The power singing in her blood whispered of ancient secrets and forgotten strengths. Whatever she was, whatever had awakened inside her tonight, it was only the beginning. Behind her, the crescent moon pack's howls of distress echoed through the trees. But ahead of her, somewhere in the vast wilderness, destiny waited. Wanting to see what would happen next, subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories. Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. Chapter 2. The Alpha King arrived like a storm front, swift and devastating. Lyra had barely made it to the edge of Crescent Moon territory when the howls began, not the distressed calls she'd left behind, but something else entirely. Deep, resonant notes that seemed to vibrate through the earth itself. Every wolf for miles would recognize that sound. There was only one creature whose voice could command such absolute authority. She turned back toward the stone circle she'd just left, her newly awakened senses picking up details she'd never noticed before. The scent of rain on wind, though no clouds darkened the sky. The rustle of leaves as small creatures fled to their hiding places. And underneath it all, something else. Something that made the power in her veins sing with recognition. Running so soon. The voice came from directly behind her. Lyra spun around, silver light flaring involuntarily from her eyes. A man stood in the shadows between two ancient oaks, though she was certain no one had been there moments before. He was tall, broader through the shoulders than any wolf she'd ever seen, with dark hair that seemed to absorb the moonlight rather than reflect it. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch, pale blue, like winter ice, and completely unreadable. "Alpha King," she whispered, dropping instinctively to one knee. "Rise." His command was quiet but absolute. "I'm not your alpha anymore, am I?" Marcus made that quite clear. Lyra stood slowly, keeping her eyes downcast. Every story she'd ever heard about Thane Shadowmere painted him as a ruler both feared and respected, a wolf who'd united the fractured packs through a combination of political brilliance and ruthless strength. But none of those stories had prepared her for the raw power that radiated from him like heat from a forge. "You felt it too," he said, and she realized he was talking about the energy that had exploded from her during the ceremony. "That surge when your bonds were severed." "Interesting." "I don't understand what happened," Lyra admitted, finally raising her eyes to meet his. "I've never shifted. Never shown any sign of wolf strength. Never fit in with your precious pack." His smile was sharp as a blade. "And yet tonight, you shattered bonds that should have simply dissolved. You broke silver rope without touching it. You made an alpha step back in fear." He moved closer, and she caught his scent, pine and winter air and something darker. "Tell me, little wolf, what do you know about your bloodline?" "I'm a Blackthorn. My family has been part of Crescent Moon for generations." "Your adoptive family," he corrected, and the words hit her like a physical blow. "Elena Blackthorn found you in the forest 23 years ago. A newborn with silver eyes, crying beside the body of a woman she assumed was your mother. What she didn't tell you, what she didn't tell anyone, was that the woman bore the mark of the ancient bloodlines." Lyra's legs nearly gave out. "That's impossible. The ancient bloodlines died out centuries ago." "Did they?" Thane circled her slowly, like a predator evaluating prey. "Tell me, when the power hit you tonight, what did it feel like?" She closed her eyes, remembering. "Like waking up. Like I'd been asleep my whole life and suddenly." She opened her eyes to find him watching her intently. "Like I was finally myself." "Bloodline awakening," he said quietly. "I haven't seen one in over a century." He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "Which brings me to why I'm here." Behind them, she could hear voices calling through the trees. Marcus and his wolves, no doubt searching for their former packmate to ensure she'd truly left their territory. But Thane seemed unconcerned by the approaching sounds. "You have two choices," he continued. "You can run, as you were planning. Live as a rogue, packless and powerless, always looking over your shoulder. Most rogues don't survive their first winter." "And the other choice?" His smile was all teeth. "You attempt the impossible trial. Lyra's blood turned to ice. Every wolf knew the stories. The trial was a test of strength, cunning, and will that the Alpha King used to select members of his elite royal guard. It was also a death sentence. No wolf had survived it in over 300 years. "You're insane," she breathed. "Perhaps. But consider the alternative. If you succeed, and I stress if, you would be granted a position in my royal guard. You would outrank every alpha in the kingdom, including the one who just cast you out. You would have power, purpose, and protection. And if I fail? You die. But at least you die with honor, instead of slowly starving in some forgotten corner of the wilderness." The voices were getting closer. Marcus's scent carried on the wind, along with half a dozen other pack members. They would be here soon, and Lyra doubted they intended to simply escort her to the border. "Why?" she asked suddenly. "Why offer this to me? You don't even know me." Something flickered in those pale blue eyes, there and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "Let's say I have an interest in unusual bloodlines." It wasn't really an answer, but before she could press him further, the first of Marcus's wolves burst through the underbrush. The Alpha himself followed seconds later, his face twisted with rage that melted into shock when he saw who stood beside his former packmate. "My king." Marcus dropped to the ground in the deepest bow Lyra had ever seen. "Forgive us. We didn't know you were, we were simply ensuring the rogue left our territory." "Were you?" Thane's voice was conversational, but Lyra felt the temperature drop several degrees. "How fortunate that I arrived when I did, then. Miss Blackthorn and I were just discussing her future." "Her future is exile," Marcus said, though he kept his eyes fixed on the ground. "She has been severed from our pack. She has no claim to." "She has no claim to your pack," Thane agreed. "But that doesn't mean she has no value to the crown." Marcus's head snapped up, his face pale. "You can't be serious. She's weak. Broken. She can't even shift. Can't she?" Thane glanced at Lyra, and she felt that power stirring again beneath her skin. Not the wild explosion from the ceremony, but something more controlled. More purposeful. "Show him." "I don't know how," she protested. "You do. You've always known. You just convinced yourself you didn't." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Stop thinking like a pack wolf. Start thinking like what you really are." Lyra closed her eyes and reached for that silver fire that had awakened inside her. It responded immediately, flooding her system with strength she'd never imagined. When she opened her eyes again, she knew they were glowing with that eerie silver light. The shift began. But it wasn't like the stories she'd heard from other wolves, the painful stretching and breaking and reforming of bones. This felt like shedding a skin she'd never wanted to wear. Her body flowed from human to wolf like water, taking a new shape, smooth and natural and utterly right. When the change was complete, she stood on 4 legs for the first time in her life, looking down at Marcus and his wolves through silver eyes. Her fur was pure white, like fresh snow under moonlight, and she was larger than any wolf in the clearing. Even Thane seemed impressed. "Magnificent," he murmured, and she felt a flutter of something that might have been pride. She shifted back to human form just as smoothly, the power settling into her bones like it belonged there. Marcus stared at her with his mouth hanging open, while his pack members cowered behind him. "As I was saying," Thane continued as if nothing remarkable had happened, "Miss Blackthorn will be attempting the impossible trial. I trust you have no objections, Marcus?" It wasn't really a question. Marcus shook his head frantically. "Excellent. The trial begins at dawn, 3 days from now, at the Whispering Maze." Thane turned back to Lyra, his expression unreadable. "I'll have an escort sent to collect you. Don't disappoint me." He began to walk away, then paused. "Oh, and Marcus? If I hear that any member of your pack has harassed Miss Blackthorn before the trial, I'll consider it a personal insult. And we both know how I handle personal insults." Marcus went even paler. "Of course, my king. She'll be protected. Good. Thane disappeared into the shadows as suddenly as he'd appeared, leaving only his scent and the memory of those ice-blue eyes. Lyra stood in the sudden silence, acutely aware of how the pack members now looked at her, not with contempt, but with fear. Even Marcus kept his distance. 3 days, she whispered to herself. 3 days to prepare for a trial that would either grant her everything she'd ever wanted or kill her in the most brutal way possible. 3 days to figure out what the Alpha King really wanted from her, because his explanation had felt like a lie wrapped in silk. As she walked deeper into the forest, away from the wolves who had rejected her and toward an uncertain future, one thought kept echoing in her mind. Why would the most powerful Alpha in the kingdom personally offer the impossible trial to a wolf who supposedly couldn't even shift? What did Thane Shadowmere really know about her bloodline? And why did she get the feeling that her survival, or failure, was more important to him than he'd let on? The Whispering Maze had a reputation for driving wolves mad before it killed them. But as the silver power hummed contentedly in her veins, Lyra began to suspect that madness might be the least of her worries. The Alpha King was playing a game, and she was just beginning to understand that she might be more than a player, she might be the prize. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 3. The Whispering Maze stood like a monument to madness against the dawn sky. Lyra had expected something medieval, stone walls covered in moss, perhaps, or ancient wooden barriers worn smooth by time. Instead, she found herself staring at walls that seemed to shift and breathe, composed of what looked like living shadow threaded through with veins of pulsing silver light. The entrance yawned before her like a mouth, and she could swear she heard it breathing. Second thoughts? Thane's voice came from behind her, closer than she'd expected. She didn't turn around. 3 days of preparation had taught her that showing weakness around the Alpha King was a mistake. Instead, she'd spent the time learning to control her newfound abilities, practicing the shift until it felt as natural as breathing, and trying to ignore the growing certainty that she was walking into a trap. Just wondering why you're here personally, she said. Don't you have a kingdom to run? His laugh was low and dark. The trial hasn't had a participant in 50 years. This is historic. Historic, she repeated flatly. Is that what we're calling potential suicide now? You could still walk away. But there was something in his tone that suggested he knew she wouldn't. Couldn't, more like. The past 3 days had shown her glimpses of what she might become, power that made her former life seem like a pale shadow. The idea of returning to that half-existence was unbearable. And let you win whatever game you're playing? I don't think so. This time his silence stretched long enough that she did turn to look at him. Thane stood with his arms crossed, those ice-blue eyes studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. What makes you think I'm playing a game? Because everything you've told me has been either a half-truth or an outright lie. She faced him fully, letting her own silver eyes flare with power. You didn't just happen to sense my awakening and show up at the perfect moment. You've been watching me. Waiting. Clever girl. He stepped closer, and she forced herself not to retreat. But not clever enough to walk away. No. Because whatever you want from me, I want it more. She turned back toward the maze entrance, where the shadows seemed to writhe with anticipation. And because something tells me the only way I'll get answers is by going through that thing. The maze doesn't give answers, Lyra. It takes them. Along with sanity, hope, and usually life itself. Then I guess I'll have to be stronger than the others. Without giving herself time to reconsider, she stepped into the entrance. The world changed instantly. The temperature dropped 20 degrees, and the air became thick as syrup, making each breath feel like drowning in reverse. The walls closed in around her, no longer the breathing shadows she'd seen from outside, but something far worse. They pulsed with a sickly phosphorescent glow, and she could see shapes moving beneath their surface, faces, hands, entire bodies trapped and reaching toward her with desperate fingers. The previous challengers, she realized with horror. They're still here. Welcome, little wolf. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, a whisper that seemed to echo from the walls themselves. Do you know what this place really is? Lyra forced herself to keep walking forward, even as the corridor split into 3 identical paths ahead of her. A trial. A test of worthiness. Laughter like breaking glass filled the air. A prison, child. A tomb. And now it will be yours as well. She chose the middle path because it felt right, though she couldn't have explained why. Her silver eyes were beginning to adjust to the strange light, picking out details that shouldn't have been visible. Symbols carved into the walls, so faint they might have been tricks of the light. Ancient words in a language she didn't recognize but somehow understood. Not carved, she realized. Burned. By someone like me. You see them too. This voice was different, softer, female, and coming from directly ahead of her rather than from the walls. I wondered if you would. Lyra stopped walking. The corridor stretched endlessly in both directions now, and she couldn't remember which way she'd come. But standing in the center of the path was a woman made of silver light, translucent but unmistakably real. Who are you? I think you know. The woman stepped closer, and Lyra could see that her eyes were the same unsettling silver as her own. I've been calling to you for months, child. In your dreams, in those moments between sleeping and waking when the barriers are thin. I don't dream. It was a lie. She'd been having the dreams for weeks, visions of running through endless forests, of power that could reshape the world, of a voice calling her name across impossible distances. Everyone dreams. You just convinced yourself you didn't, the same way you convinced yourself you couldn't shift. The woman smiled sadly. My bloodline has always been gifted at self-deception. Your bloodline? I am Seraphina Silvermane, last queen of the ancient bloodlines. And you, my dear great-granddaughter, are the key to my freedom. The walls around them began to shift and writhe more violently, and Lyra heard something that sounded like screaming coming from deep within the maze. But she couldn't look away from the ghostly woman before her. That's impossible. The ancient bloodlines died out. They were murdered, Seraphina corrected, her form flickering with what might have been rage. By the Shadowmere dynasty, who feared our power and coveted our territories. All except me. I was too strong to kill, so they trapped me here instead. Made my prison into their trial, so that any who might carry my blood would be drawn here to die. The screaming was getting closer, accompanied by the sound of something large and predatory moving through the maze. Lyra's newly awakened instincts screamed at her to run, but she stood her ground. Why should I believe you? Because you can feel the truth of it in your bones. Because the power in your blood recognizes its source. Because, Seraphina's eyes widened with sudden fear. It's found you. Run, child. Run now. Lyra spun around to see something that belonged in nightmares lumbering toward her. It might have been a wolf once, but it had been stretched and twisted into something obscene. Its limbs were too long, its jaw unhinged like a snake's, and where its eyes should have been were empty sockets that wept darkness. The guardian of regrets, Seraphina whispered. It feeds on shame and self-doubt. Don't let it touch you. But Lyra was already moving, her wolf form flowing around her like water as she raced down the corridor. Behind her, the creature's howl shattered the air, a sound like every mistake she'd ever made given voice. Weak, it seemed to say. Worthless. Rejected by your own kind. Why do you even try? The words hit her like physical blows, and she stumbled, her human form reasserting itself as doubt crashed over her. She was weak. She had been rejected. What was she doing here, pretending she could be something more than the broken wolf everyone had always known her to be? Don't listen. Seraphina appeared beside her, her silver light blazing. It's using your memories against you. That shame belongs to the past. But the creature was gaining ground, its massive paws thudding against the floor like a funeral drum. And now the walls were changing again, showing her scenes from her childhood. Every moment of humiliation, every failed attempt at shifting, every disappointed look from her adoptive mother. You couldn't even earn love from people who chose to raise you, the creature whispered in her mind. What makes you think you deserve power? Lyra fell to her knees, overwhelmed by the weight of memories she'd spent years trying to forget. The creature's breath was hot on her neck now, smelling of decay and broken dreams. Look at me, Seraphina commanded, her voice cutting through the mental fog. Look at me and remember who you really are. Lyra raised her eyes and saw not the ghostly queen, but herself, but a version of herself that blazed with confidence and power. A version that had never doubted her worth or apologized for taking up space in the world. I am not my past, she whispered. The creature's claws scraped against the floor as it reached for her. I am not their rejection, she said louder, feeling that silver fire beginning to burn in her chest. I am the granddaughter of queens, she roared, rising to her feet as power exploded outward from her in waves. And I do not kneel to shadows. The guardian of regrets shrieked as her light struck it, its form dissolving like smoke in a hurricane. The walls stopped their writhing, and for a moment, the maze was silent. Well done, Seraphina said softly. But that was only the first test. There will be others, each designed to break a different part of your spirit. The labyrinth of lost chances, where you'll see every path you didn't take. The chamber of final moments, where you'll experience the deaths of everyone you've ever loved. How many? Lyra interrupted. 7 trials, each worse than the last. And at the end, if you survive. Seraphina's expression grew grim. At the end, you'll face the Shadowmere King himself. Because this maze doesn't just test worthiness for the royal guard. It tests whether you're strong enough to challenge the throne. Then that's what I'll do, Lyra said, surprised by the certainty in her own voice. I'll face them all. And when I'm done, I'll free you from this place. Child, you don't understand. I've been trapped here for 300 years. I've grown, changed. The power that flows through this place has twisted me, made me something other than what I was. I may not be worth saving anymore. Lyra looked at the woman who claimed to be her ancestor, translucent and fragmented, but still fighting after centuries of imprisonment. Still trying to protect a descendant she'd never met. Everyone is worth saving, she said firmly. And everyone deserves the chance to choose their own path, even if others fear where it might lead. Seraphina stared at her for a long moment, then smiled, the first genuine expression Lyra had seen from her. You remind me of myself at your age. Too stubborn to know when to give up. I'll take that as a compliment. It was meant as one. Now come, granddaughter. Let me teach you what your eyes can really see in this place. If you're determined to attempt the impossible, you'll need every advantage I can give you. As they walked deeper into the maze, Lyra felt the weight of destiny settling around her shoulders like a mantle. She'd entered this place expecting to face trials of strength and cunning. Instead, she discovered that everything she thought she knew about her life, her bloodline, and the kingdom she'd grown up in had been built on lies. But she'd also discovered something else. She was tired of being afraid. Tired of apologizing for her existence. Tired of letting others define her worth. The maze stretched endlessly ahead of them, filled with horrors designed to break her spirit and claim her life. But for the first time in 23 years, Lyra Blackthorn knew exactly who she was. She was the heir to a murdered bloodline, the descendant of queens, and possibly the only wolf alive who could challenge the throne that had been built on her family's graves. The Whispering Maze had been designed to destroy her. She was going to tear it apart instead. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 4. The heart of the Whispering Maze was nothing like Lyra had expected. After surviving 6 trials that had tested every aspect of her spirit, facing her deepest regrets, her greatest fears, her most shameful moments, she had anticipated finding some grand chamber filled with ancient relics or mystical artifacts. Instead, she stood in what looked like a child's nursery, frozen in time. The walls were painted with soft pastels that had faded over the centuries, depicting scenes of wolves running beneath crescent moons. A wooden crib sat in one corner, draped with cobwebs that shimmered like silver in the strange light that emanated from Seraphina's increasingly solid form. Toys were scattered across the floor, wooden blocks, a stuffed rabbit with button eyes, a mobile of carved wolves that turned slowly despite the absence of any breeze. This was her room, Seraphina said softly, her voice heavy with a grief that had had 300 years to ferment. My daughter, Celeste. She would have been your great-aunt. Lyra knelt beside a small rocking horse, its paint worn smooth by tiny hands that would never touch it again. What happened to her? The same thing that happened to all of them. Seraphina's form flickered with rage, becoming more opaque as her emotions intensified. Thane's great-grandfather, Aldrich Shadowmere, convinced the pack leaders that our silver eyes were a sign of corruption. That we were cursed beings who would bring darkness to the werewolf kingdom. He spread rumors that our power came from making deals with malevolent spirits, that we fed on the life force of other wolves to sustain ourselves. The temperature in the room dropped as Seraphina's power built, and Lyra could see her breath misting in the suddenly frigid air. On the walls, the painted wolves seemed to move, running in endless circles as if trying to escape their two-dimensional prison. The truth was simpler and far more threatening to his ambitions, Seraphina continued. The silver eyes mark the true alpha bloodline, wolves who can command not just their own pack, but any wolf, regardless of existing bonds. We are the original royal line, the first among our kind. And Aldrich Shadowmere wanted that power for himself. Lyra stood slowly, pieces of a puzzle she hadn't even known existed finally clicking into place. The rejection ceremony. My inability to shift normally. It wasn't because I was weak. It was because you were too strong. Seraphina moved to stand beside her, and for the first time since they'd met, Lyra could feel warmth radiating from her ancestor's form. A true alpha's wolf doesn't emerge through the violent breaking that other wolves experience. It awakens gradually, naturally, when the individual is ready to accept their full power. The Shadowmeres knew this, so they made sure every pack in the kingdom would see a wolf who couldn't shift on command as defective. Broken. Worthy only of rejection. The implications hit Lyra like a physical blow. They've been hunting us. For centuries. Making sure that anyone who showed signs of the true bloodline would be cast out before they could awaken. Or killed outright, if casting out wasn't enough. Seraphina's eyes blazed with silver fire. They murdered my husband first, made it look like a hunting accident. Then they came for our children, one by one. Celeste was only 2 when they found her. They told everyone she'd been taken by rogues, but I knew. I knew they'd snuffed out her light themselves. Lyra felt a rage building in her chest that dwarfed anything she'd experienced during the trials. All those years of feeling worthless, of apologizing for her existence, of watching her adoptive mother's face grow more disappointed with each failed attempt at shifting. All of it orchestrated by a family of usurpers who had built their throne on the bones of murdered children. How many, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. How many what, child? How many of us have they killed? Seraphina was quiet for so long that Lyra thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of centuries of grief. All of them. Every silver-eyed wolf born in the last 300 years. Every child who showed even the slightest sign of true alpha potential. You are the last, Lyra. The very last of our line. The painted wolves on the walls had stopped running. Now they all faced toward the center of the room, toward Lyra, their eyes glowing with the same silver light that pulsed in her veins. She could feel their expectation, their desperate hope, pressing against her consciousness like a physical weight. What do you want from me? She asked, though she was beginning to suspect she already knew the answer. I want you to take back what was stolen from us. Seraphina moved to the crib, running translucent fingers over the wooden rail. I want you to reclaim the throne that rightfully belongs to our bloodline. I want you to make them pay for every life they've taken, every dream they've crushed, every future they've stolen. And if I refuse? Then our bloodline dies with you, and the Shadowmeres continue their reign of lies and manipulation until some other family grows strong enough to challenge them. The cycle continues, just with different players. Lyra walked to the window, though the view beyond showed only swirling mist and shadows. You're asking me to start a civil war. Wolves will die, innocent wolves who have no part in this centuries-old conspiracy. Wolves are already dying, Serafina said sharply. Every rogue cast out for failing to meet impossible standards. Every defective pup who disappears in the night. Every wolf who dares to question the established order and finds themselves facing mysterious accidents. The war has been going on for 3 centuries, child. The Shadowmeres have just made sure it was a war only they were allowed to fight. The truth of those words settled into Lyra's bones with painful clarity. She thought of all the stories she'd heard growing up, rogues found dead at the borders, young wolves who'd simply vanished without explanation, families who'd lost children to hunting accidents that never quite made sense. How many of those had been murders disguised as tragedies? What would I have to do, she asked, hating herself for even considering it. Accept your full power. Let your true alpha nature emerge completely. Serafina moved away from the crib, her form becoming more solid with each word. And then you must do what I could not. You must kill Thane Shadowmere and end his line's claim to the throne. Kill him. The words tasted like poison in her mouth. He is not innocent, Lyra. Thane knows exactly what his family has done and continues to do. He brought you here not to offer you a place in his guard, but to eliminate the last threat to his illegitimate rule. This maze, these trials, they were never meant to test worthiness. They were meant to kill you. Lyra turned back to her ancestor, studying the ghostly figure with new eyes. If I do this, if I claim my power and challenge him, what happens to you? The magic that binds me to this place will be broken. I'll finally be free to cross over to whatever comes after this existence. Serafina smiled sadly. I've been ready to rest for a very long time, child. But I couldn't go knowing that our bloodline would die with me in this cursed maze. The painted wolves on the walls were moving again, but this time they weren't running in circles. They were moving toward the door, toward the exit, as if showing her the path she needed to take. Lyra could feel their urgency, their desire for justice after centuries of suppression. There's something else you need to know, Serafina said quietly. About your adoptive family. About the Crescent Moon Pack. Lyra's heart clenched. What about them? Elena Blackthorn didn't find you by accident. She was sent to retrieve you by Marcus's predecessor, Alpha Garrett. They knew what you were from the moment they saw your silver eyes, but instead of killing you outright, they decided to use you as a test case. They wanted to see if they could break a true Alpha's spirit completely, make you so convinced of your own worthlessness that your power would never awaken. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Lyra's feet. That's not possible. Elena raised me. She loved me. Did she? Serafina's voice was gentle but relentless. Or did she follow a careful script designed to ensure you never felt worthy of love? Think, child. When did she ever offer you comfort without conditions? When did she ever defend you against the pack's cruelty? When did she ever make you feel like you belonged? Lyra wanted to argue, to defend the woman who had raised her, but the memories wouldn't cooperate. Every embrace came with criticism. Every word of encouragement was followed by disappointment when she failed to meet impossible expectations. Even her rejection ceremony, Elena's cold renunciation, had been delivered with the precision of someone who had rehearsed the words for years. She was following orders, she whispered. They all were. Marcus, Elena, every member of the pack who made you feel lesser. They were all part of an elaborate psychological experiment designed to ensure that even if a true alpha was born, they would be too broken to ever realize their potential. The rage building in Lyra's chest exploded outward in a wave of silver fire that made the entire room tremble. The painted wolves howled silently from their walls, and she could feel power flowing through her unlike anything she'd experienced during her awakening or the trials. They made me hate myself, she said, her voice echoing with newfound authority. They made me apologize for existing. They made me grateful for scraps of affection from people who were deliberately withholding love. Yes. Seraphina's form was now so solid she looked almost alive. And they would have continued doing so until you died, alone and forgotten, never knowing what you truly were. Just as they intended. Lyra felt something fundamental shift inside her, like a door she'd never known existed finally swinging open. The power that had awakened during the rejection ceremony was nothing compared to what flooded her system now. She could sense every wolf in the kingdom, feel their pack bonds, their fears, their desperate need for strong leadership. More than that, she could sense their dissatisfaction with the current order, their growing suspicion that something was fundamentally wrong with the way their world was structured. "I can hear them," she breathed. "All of them. They're ready for change. They're ready for truth. The question is, are you ready to give it to them?" Lyra looked around the nursery one more time, at the toys that would never be played with again, at the crib that would never hold another silver-eyed child, at the painted wolves who had been frozen in their endless chase for 3 centuries. She thought of all the true alpha children who had died before they could grow up, all the potential that had been snuffed out to maintain an illegitimate dynasty's grip on power. Then she thought of Thane, waiting somewhere beyond the maze, confident that his latest threat would be eliminated just like all the others. "I'm ready," she said, and meant it. The transformation that followed was unlike anything she had experienced before. This wasn't the smooth flow from human to wolf that she'd mastered over the past few days. This was the complete awakening of her true alpha nature, and it felt like being reborn. Power flooded every cell of her body, rewriting her very DNA to accommodate abilities that had been suppressed for 23 years. When it was finished, she was still in human form, but she could feel the difference in every breath she took. She was stronger, faster, more aware than she had ever been. And underneath it all, she could feel the absolute certainty of her own authority, not granted by a pack or earned through trials, but inherent in her very existence. "Now comes the hard part," Seraphina said, but she was smiling with fierce pride. "You must leave this place and face the false king. Are you ready to claim your birthright?" Lyra nodded, feeling more ready for anything than she had ever been in her life. The painted wolves on the walls had finally stopped moving, their silver eyes watching her with approval and expectation. She was no longer the broken wolf who had entered this maze. She was the last true alpha, the rightful heir to the werewolf throne, and she was about to remind the kingdom what real power looked like. But as she walked toward the door that would lead her back to the world, one thought echoed in her mind with troubling clarity: starting a war was easy. The real challenge would be ending it without destroying everything she was fighting to save. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 5. The whispering maze shattered like glass behind Lyra as she stepped into the dawn light. The sound was deafening, 3 centuries of trapped magic releasing in a single explosive moment. The walls that had seemed so solid and eternal crumbled to dust, taking with them the screams of the imprisoned souls who had finally found peace. Where the entrance had stood just moments before, nothing remained but empty air and the lingering scent of silver fire. Thane was waiting for her, of course. But he wasn't alone. Hundreds of wolves surrounded the now empty space where the maze had been, representatives from every major pack in the kingdom. Alphas, betas, pack members. They had come to witness what they thought would be either her triumph or her death. Instead, they found themselves staring at something none of them had ever seen before. A true alpha in her full power. Lyra could feel their awe, their fear, their confusion as clearly as if they were broadcasting their emotions directly into her mind. The pack bonds that tied each wolf to their alpha were visible to her now, golden threads of connection that pulsed with life and loyalty. But more than that, she could sense the deeper bonds, the ancient ties that connected every wolf to the first of their kind, the primordial pack that had existed before politics and territory divided them. Those bonds recognized her. And they sang. "Magnificent," Thane said quietly, but his voice carried to every ear in the clearing. "I had hoped I was wrong about what you were. I see now that hoping was futile." He stood differently than he had before, not with the casual confidence of a king secure in his power, but with the tense readiness of a warrior preparing for battle. His ice-blue eyes held something she'd never seen there before, genuine fear. "You know what I am," Lyra said, and her voice carried an authority that made several of the watching wolves drop to their knees involuntarily. "You've always known. I knew what you might become. What you were born to be." He gestured to the empty space behind her. "The question is whether you understand the price of that power." "The price?" Lyra stepped forward, and the assembled wolves parted before her like water. "You mean the price your family has been making others pay for 3 centuries? The murdered children? The broken spirits? The lies built on the bones of the innocent?" A murmur ran through the crowd, shock, confusion, fear. These wolves knew nothing of the true history, nothing of the conspiracy that had shaped their entire world. They were about to learn, whether they wanted to or not. "Tell them," Lyra commanded, and the power in her voice made it impossible for Thane to refuse. "Tell them what your great-grandfather did. Tell them how he built his throne on genocide." Thane's jaw clenched, but when he spoke, his words carried clearly to every ear. Aldrich Shadowmere spread lies about the Silver-Eyed bloodline. He convinced the Pax that they were cursed, dangerous. He orchestrated their systematic elimination over 3 centuries. The murmur became a roar of outrage and disbelief. Alphas shouted questions while their pack members pressed closer, desperate to understand how their entire worldview had been built on deception. "But you don't know the rest of it," Thane continued, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You don't know why he did it." "Greed," Lyra snarled. "Ambition. The same things that drive all tyrants. Fear." The single word silenced the entire gathering. He did it out of fear of something far worse than political upheaval. Thane raised his hand, and shadows began to gather around him, not the ordinary darkness of night, but something deeper, hungrier. The watching wolves backed away instinctively as the shadows took shape, forming images in the air above their heads. 350 years ago, the original royal line faced an enemy that nearly destroyed our entire species, he said, and the shadows showed scenes of wolves running in terror through burning forests. They called it the Void, an entity from beyond our world that fed on supernatural power. The stronger the magic, the brighter it burned in its perception. The images shifted, showing silver-eyed wolves standing against a darkness so complete it seemed to devour light itself. But as they fought, as they used their incredible power to drive the entity back, something terrible became clear. Their power was calling to it, drawing it like a beacon across the cosmic void. The true Alpha bloodline didn't just resist the void, Thane continued, his voice heavy with a grief that seemed genuine. They were connected to it. Their power resonated with its essence in ways that made them both its greatest enemies and its most effective summoning totems. Lyra felt the blood drain from her face as the implications hit her. "You're lying." "Am I?" The shadows showed her a scene that made her heart stop, Seraphina Silvermane, in her full power, standing in what looked like the heart of the maze. But she wasn't fighting to escape. She was fighting to stay contained, her silver fire burning in complex patterns that looked almost like binding runes. "My great-great-grandmother didn't imprison your ancestor out of jealousy or ambition," Thane said quietly. "She imprisoned her at Seraphina's own request. Because every time a true Alpha used their full power, it sent out a signal that could be felt across dimensions. And the Void was always listening." "No." But even as Lyra denied it, she could feel the truth of his words resonating in her bones. The power that flowed through her was vast, incredible, and somehow familiar, as if she'd touched it before in dreams she couldn't quite remember. Dreams of darkness and endless hunger and something vast and patient waiting just beyond the edge of reality. The maze wasn't just a prison, Thane continued relentlessly. It was a containment system, designed to muffle the signal that true Alpha power generates. Every wolf who entered it and died helped strengthen the bindings that kept Seraphina's power from calling out to the void. It was a monstrous system, but it was the only thing standing between our world and complete annihilation. The gathered wolves were silent now, struggling to process revelations that shattered everything they thought they knew about their history. Lyra could feel their confusion, their fear, their desperate need for someone to tell them what to do in the face of such impossible choices. And now I've destroyed it, she whispered. Yes. The moment you awakened to your full power, the moment you shattered the maze and freed your ancestor's spirit, you sent out a signal that's been traveling across the void for the past hour. Thane's shadow showed her something that made her soul recoil, darkness moving between stars, vast and hungry and inexorably heading toward their world. It will be here within days. Lyra felt the weight of destiny crashing down on her shoulders like a physical force. Everyone she had ever known, every wolf in the kingdom, every innocent life, all of them now faced extinction because she had chosen revenge over caution. What do you want me to do? She asked, hating how small her voice sounded. There is a way, Thane said, but his expression was grim. One path that might save us all, though it will require both of us to sacrifice everything we thought we wanted. The shadows around him shifted again, showing her images of wolves with silver eyes and wolves with gold working together, their combined power forming patterns that looked nothing like the individual magics of either bloodline. Where her silver fire met his golden strength, something new emerged, not the hungry resonance that called to the void, but something that seemed to actively repel it. The prophecies speak of unity, he continued. Not the dominance of one bloodline over another, but the joining of silver and gold into something that has never existed before. A power that can stand against the darkness without feeding it. Lyra stared at the images, her mind racing through possibilities and implications. You're talking about binding our bloodlines together. Permanently. I'm talking about creating something new. A form of leadership that transcends the old pack structures, that draws on the strengths of both our lines while minimizing their individual weaknesses. His ice-blue eyes met her silver ones, and she saw desperation there, carefully hidden beneath layers of royal training. I'm talking about saving our people, even if it means neither of us gets to rule them the way we thought we would. And if I refuse? If I decide to take my throne and face this void with the power I was born to wield? Then we all die. Our entire species, wiped out because one of us chose pride over survival. The assembled wolves had begun to murmur among themselves, pack bonds flaring as alphas communicated rapidly with their subordinates. They could sense the truth in Thane's words, could feel the approaching darkness like a storm front on the horizon. But they could also sense the potential in what he was proposing, a new form of unity that could make them stronger than either bloodline had ever been alone. Lyra closed her eyes and reached out with her newly awakened senses, feeling for the cosmic presence that Thane claimed was approaching. For a moment, she felt nothing. Then, at the very edge of her perception, she touched something that made her soul scream. Hunger. Vast, patient, inevitable hunger that had been waiting centuries for exactly this moment. It knew her now, could taste her power across the void, and it was coming with the inexorable certainty of gravity itself. There's something else, she said, opening her eyes to meet Thane's gaze. Something you haven't told them. A flicker of surprise crossed his features. What do you mean? This entity, this void. It's not just drawn to true alpha power. It's been influencing us. Both bloodlines. Pushing us toward conflict, toward the very awakening that would call it home. The certainty filled her as she spoke, pieces of an impossible puzzle finally falling into place. It's been playing us against each other for generations, knowing that eventually someone would do exactly what I just did. The color drained from Thane's face. That's not possible. Isn't it? Your family's obsession with eliminating the true alphas, doesn't it seem excessive, even for political ambition? And my bloodline's inability to simply disappear, to hide and live quiet lives instead of constantly emerging to challenge the established order? She gestured to the assembled wolves, many of whom were nodding as understanding dawned. We've been dancing to its tune this whole time, and we never even realized it. Then we're already lost, someone called from the crowd. Marcus, she realized, looking older and more fragile than she'd ever seen him. If it's been manipulating us for centuries, if everything we've done has been part of its plan, then there's no way to fight it. No. Lyra stepped forward, her power blazing around her like silver flames. There's always another way. We just have to be willing to forge it ourselves. She turned to address the entire gathering, her voice carrying to every wolf present with the absolute authority of her awakened nature. The old ways are broken. The pack system, the territorial divisions, the endless cycles of dominance and submission, all of it has been tainted by an entity that feeds on our conflicts. But we have a choice. We can cling to the familiar patterns that brought us to this precipice, or we can become something new. Something it never anticipated. What are you proposing? Asked an alpha she didn't recognize, a woman with scars across her throat that spoke of old battles. I'm proposing we stop being separate packs and start being one people. Not under the dominance of any single bloodline, but as equals united by choice rather than conquest. She looked at Thane, seeing her own desperate hope reflected in his eyes. I'm proposing we create a leadership structure that draws on the wisdom of all wolves, not just those with the right parentage or the strongest bite. A council, Thane said, understanding dawning in his voice. Representatives from every pack, every bloodline, every tradition. No single ruler, but a collective wisdom that can adapt to threats our ancestors never imagined. And when the void arrives, we face it together. Not as silver-eyed wolves or gold-eyed wolves, but as something it has never encountered before, a unified species that refuses to be manipulated into self-destruction. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, a voice called out, "What about the pack bonds? What about our territories? The bonds that matter, the ones that connect us as wolves, as family, as community, those remain," Lyra said. But the artificial divisions, the hierarchies based on fear and dominance? Those we abandon. We keep what serves us and discard what has been used to control us. One by one, the alphas began to nod. Not in submission, but in recognition of a truth that resonated deeper than political ambition. They had all felt the approaching darkness, had all sensed that their old ways of thinking were inadequate to meet the challenge ahead. "I'll stand with you," said the scarred alpha. "My pack will stand with you." "And mine," called another voice, then another, until the clearing rang with declarations of unity that would have been impossible just hours before. Thane stepped forward, and to Lyra's amazement, he knelt before her. Not in submission, but in recognition of what she represented, not just a true alpha, but the catalyst for a transformation their species desperately needed. "I offer my strength to this new path," he said formally. "My bloodline's power, my knowledge, my commitment to protecting our people in whatever form that protection must take." Lyra reached down and took his hands, pulling him to his feet. Where their skin touched, silver and gold fire merged into something entirely new, a power that felt clean and strong and utterly opposed to the hungry darkness she'd sensed approaching. "Then we begin," she said, and felt the future rearranging itself around their choice. The chronicle of the old ways ended in that moment, with Lyra Blackthorn neither claiming nor rejecting a crown, but forging something entirely new. She had entered the Whispering Maze as a broken outcast seeking validation. She emerged as something no one had imagined, not a ruler, but a bridge between the old world and whatever came next. The darkness was still coming. But for the first time in centuries, it would find them ready. Not as separate packs or competing bloodlines, but as one people united by choice, strengthened by diversity, and absolutely determined to write their own destiny. The age of true alphas and false kings was over. The age of unity had begun. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe, like and share this video to continue listening to this type of story daily and also, to appreciate this community too. I would like to hear your wonderful opinion about this story. Please comment below.